Welcome back to Reality Asserts Itself on the Real News Network. I'm Paul Jay in Baltimore. Eddie Conway, in his book, Martial Law, The Life and Times of a Baltimore Black Panther, writes, I was working for the fire department in April 1968 when Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated. I'd felt for some time that King's importance for black people had begun to wane. His commitment to nonviolence in the face of such extreme force seemed to have lost its resonance in our community. Black people were tired, angry, and frustrated. The time had come for us to do more than just sing in the streets and march on capitals. Not that we necessarily knew what else to do at the time, but it was certainly clear that we needed to change the strategy. The fact that Malcolm X and Martin Luther King had been assassinated within 3 years of each other was too much for many blacks, and the result came in the form of riots that raged across the nation. Now joining us in our studio is Eddie Conway. Just to remind everybody, Eddie Conway was a lieutenant of security for the Baltimore chapter of the Black Panther Party from '68 to 1970. He was convicted for a murder for which there is no evidence that he had anything to do with the murder, and there was a jailhouse informant who was notorious for giving prosecutors what they wanted to hear, and based mostly on that testimony, he was convicted. He was released about 6 months ago and joins us now in the studio. Thanks for joining us again.
Okay.
So I read this quote from '68. This was a very transformative moment for you, too, as it was for many people across the country, particularly for African Americans. What did you decide to do after the assassinations?
Well, one of the things that happened actually immediately after the assassination and during the riots, because I was in the fire department, there was an emergency statewide call for all, essential personnel to report to wherever their stations, their posts, etc. And so I actually had my little firefighter uniform on, the whole 9 yards.
Describe what was going on in the streets of Baltimore.
It was rioting. There was rioting East Baltimore, West Baltimore. There was a tremendous amount of police presence. I went out in the street.
National Guard.
The National Guard.
I've seen footage of this where you see that. It's like an occupied city.
In the course of 3 blocks, I was stopped 6 times by 6 different military forces, so to speak. The Baltimore City Police Department, the National Guard, the state troopers, the Baltimore County Police, the National Park Police, the FBI. At some point I decided that it would probably be wise not to try to go to work, even though I was trying to report the work.
This is you wearing your firefighter outfit.
Yeah, and I had been threatened at least 3 or 4 times with guns, at gunpoint, and so that experience kind of told me that, there wasn't a fair and balanced way in which people were being treated. It's still, at that time, I'm still thinking integration, reform, the rest of that stuff. But I'm seeing also that we're being, outnumbered and outgunned and abused in our communities, And so it was that point that I decided to look and see. And of course, my experience in the fire department itself, it was called the Edgemere Fire Department, even though it belonged to Sparrows Point. My experience
Sparrows Point, just for everybody knows, is where Bethlehem Steel was. This used to be like the biggest steel, I think, place in the world.
It employed probably 5,000 or 6,000 people. At least 3,000 of them were black.
Which was the underpinnings for a stable black community in Baltimore until the steel industry disintegrated.
And that's one of the reasons why we attempted to integrate the white collar jobs, and of course the fire department was one of them. But inside the fire department, it was just organized racism, organized white supremacy groups, guns being passed back and forth, all kinds of sedation talk in terms of what they would do to the black community if we rioted or if we attempted to come out in suburbia, et cetera. And it was actually, it was scary. It wasn't scary to me because as if I walked into an area or room in which this was going on, everybody would shut up because they had pretty much seen that I was already pissed off. You know, I had enough, right? And but it was scary in a sense of knowing that they had organized all around the black communities, around the urban centers. They were this hostile, white supremacist, militant, Minutemen militia kind of thing that was being organized from the average white John Doe. And it was scary, and it was like, God, do we realize we're cut off? Do we realize we're in trouble? If something happens, we won't even be able to feed ourselves. And so it made me start thinking in terms of, well, what are we doing in the black community to protect ourselves, to look out for ourselves? How are we, I mean, what are we gonna do if these nuts actually get a chance to act out? And that's what kind of drove me to looking for the Black Panther Party and to look for other militant kind of things that were going on. Because at that time it was clear that racism was like really high. This was the kind of backlash from integration, the backlash from the school integration, the busing of children, et cetera. And there was a lot of hostility
this
going
is
on.
now, we're 68, moving into
68,
69.
yeah, we're in 68 now, you know. And so I decided to, you know, to go and join some other people that at least had the interest of protecting the community at heart.
So you start looking for some kind of more radical thing you can participate in.
Yes.
What are your options? What's around?
Well, at the time, there's something called Soul School, and basically it was a black culture nationalist organization, and that was advocating, you know, that we recapture our culture, that we find ourselves in our African roots, et cetera, and that we form black kind of structures. There was some other things, Black Man Development Center. They had like a Black Liberation Army kind of thing that was more show than substance. I mean, they look good, but they didn't seem like they were doing anything. And then there was the Black Panther Party.
And what did you know of the Panthers at that time?
Well, at that time, I had started reading, and the Nation of Islam. I don't want to forget the Nation of Islam. I had started reading the Panther Party paper, the Nation of Islam paper. At the time, I think that was Muhammad Speak. I was reading the bulletins from Soul School. I was reading the Black Man Development Center, the Black Man, I can't even remember the name of it anymore. I was reading this stuff and looking pretty much at all the different groups, and to me, the Black Panther Party was the only group that was one addressing the needs of the community in terms of feeding children, in terms of
breakfast
organizing,
program,
you know, self-defense, in terms of educating and so on. So I decided that, okay, they're the people that I need to find. So I actually went and searched for them, and I found them. And to my surprise, it was more of a party than a political apparatus. At the time that I found them, people were swinging across the rooms on chandeliers. The guys were partying, the women were partying. It was like a ball. And I'm saying, well, okay, I'm looking at these papers and I'm looking at what's going on in Chicago and in New York and in California, and people are partying here, something's wrong. And of course, my initial thing was, well, okay, they didn't have any leadership, they didn't have any discipline, they didn't have an understanding of what was going on. And perhaps if we got in there and worked with them, and me and a couple other guys actually joined.
The Panther organization, you know, headquartered in Oakland, didn't have oversight in the sense of what was going on in Baltimore?
It grew too fast. It had oversight in a sense that it took people to California and trained them and send them back, right? The Panther Party grew too fast. I guess at the end of '66, it actually, the formulation, in October '66, it actually started, but it didn't really take hold until like mid '67, and and then it exploded across the country. And
It became the way to express the rage, especially after '68.
Yeah, and people just start joining, group formations started, whole organizations took off their green or black or red or whatever and became Panthers, and then they sent people to California and they got trained, and it happened, it was too fast, the expansion was too fast, the training was too short, and uh, and then there was just constantly new people bombarding the formations. Even after the training was there were people joining. And as people were joining, there were people leaving.
And a lot of those people joining, we all know now, and you came to know, were cops. And in fact, you told me that the guy that actually founds the Panther Baltimore chapter is a member of the National Security Agency.
Yes, the Maryland State Chapter yes, his name was Warren Hart, and he worked for the National Security Agency and formulated the apparatus that became the Baltimore Panthers.
And the idea is
the Panthers.
The Panther Party will be a magnet to attract militants, and you'll get to know who are the militants.
And get them locked up and get them arrested, and some of them actually disappeared. One of my friends actually was murdered as a result of this guy. He sent him out on a mission that was unauthorized and illegal, and he got an entanglement with the police and ended up getting killed. I actually investigated that. That's really what triggered my investigation of him, because
him being Hart,
him being the captain at the time, right? Because it didn't make any sense what had happened at the time. All the newspapers were on strike in Baltimore. And so I went up actually and knocked on the doors and questioned people and did interviews and whatnot, and discovered that it was just the way this guy got killed. It didn't make any sense at all. And then eventually I went and questioned why he was in that area and what was he doing and who had sent him. And all the information led back to this captain. And then I started investigating the captain and determined that he wasn't who he said he was, because he didn't even live where he said he was living. He didn't work where he was supposed to be working. But at that point, I realized that I was dealing with somebody that was connected and had some kind of police cover. So I actually reported to California, and they sent an investigation team down from like New York. And during the process of investigating, he fled. He fled Maryland, he fled the country.
Now this is, as we all know now, or anyone that follows this was part of a national campaign, COINTELPRO, which involved the National Security Agency, the FBI, and many local police forces.
Military intelligence, et cetera. And,
all targeting black militancy.
Every police force, state police, the local police, et cetera. And of course, we didn't discover that until the mid '70s. I mean, by that time, they had destroyed the Black Panther Party. By some estimates, they had at least 600 agent provocateurs, police informers, undercover agents. And in the first book that I wrote, is called The Greatest Threat. I actually did my master's research for my graduate program on it in prison, right? And I'm gonna just give you an example. One of the things that I discovered in doing the research, I actually got all the COINTELPRO papers, and I got the information and actually did the research to kind of like validate everything that I was saying. One of the things that happened was that up in New York, Malcolm X. When Malcolm X was assassinated and he was dying on the stage, there was a guy bent over him giving him mouth-to-mouth respiration. And this guy's name was Gene Roberts, and this guy was Malcolm X's chief bodyguard. After Malcolm X had died, this guy ended up joining the Black Panther Party in New York. And of course his credentials was that he was Malcolm X's bodyguard. Yo, who else could you trust? You got to trust Malcolm X's bodyguard, right? He joined the Black Panther Party and he incited a conspiracy that the leadership of the Black Panther Party never participated in New York, never participated in. But they used his incitement and they locked up 21 leaders of the New York Black Panther Party, the captain from the Jamaica Queens, captain from the Bronx, captain from Manhattan, so on, right? And they locked up 20, including Tupac's mother, locked up 21 members. They kept them in jail for for about 2 years. They had them under $100,000 bail each, right? They took them to trial, and in a half an hour of the trial, no, actually they had the trial, then the jury went out. In a half an hour they came back and they exonerated all of them. Why? Because this guy Gene Roberts that was bent over Malcolm X was a actual officer of New York City Police Department, boss was the thing. And his job was to infiltrate black militant organizations and disrupt and disband them. And we don't know if he actually choked Malcolm X to death there on the stage. Of course, Malcolm X has been shot numerous times, so he probably would have died anyway. But he was a police, and then when he went and joined the Black Panther Party, he brought in fake dynamite and he brought in fake plans to commit sabotage and that kind of stuff. And all this was his doing, and he was always a police officer the whole entire time. And once the jury discovered that, they let everybody out. But it cost millions of dollars in bail money and years of people's lives, because people spent 2 years, and that was just bail money, the lawyers, the legal fees, etc. But that particular incident there, say for one, caused a split in the Black Panther Party, caused the New York chapter in New Jersey, I believe it was, split away from Oakland, Chicago, New Orleans, Baltimore, etc. It caused a split that ended up leading to conflict between the Black Panthers.
Split over what?
A split over whether or not the Black Panther Party should be resisting and fighting a guerrilla warfare, armed warfare, or whether or not we should still be building survival programs and organizing in the community.
And this issue of the split that happened in the Panthers over armed struggle and community organizing was a very profound issue, and I would be quite sure the police had a lot to do with how this whole debate unfolded too. So we're going to pick this up in the next segment. So please join us for the continuation of our interview with Eddie Conway on Reality Asserts Itself on the Real News Network.